some preliminary interpretations coming from my dissertation research. So in this presentation, I'm going to reconsider the hierarchy that emerged at the site of Cerros in Belize, a pre-classic site that's widely known to be maybe a birthplace of Maya kingship. So in this talk, I'm going to give a brief overview of my main subject of study, which is Maya caches. They act as a proxy for me to understand historical developments. I'm going to give a brief overview about Cerros, Belize, show you my methods. I use some technological approaches that most people find very interesting. And I'll give you a brief overview of the theoretical concepts that I use. I'll talk about how I grouped the subjects of my analysis. And then I'll provide a diachronic comparison for the interpretations and conclusions at the end. So, Maya caches, these are things that have been studied for quite some time now. They're well known by archaeologists, and for those that don't know, these are sacred bundles of objects, sometimes ceramics, sometimes lithics, that are most of the time put into Maya architecture. Roughly around the same time that a building might be built, a cache might be placed into the foundation of the building. Rituals would have occurred during caching ceremonies, and I decided to focus on caches because they can very specifically orient my analysis towards events. And these are events of building construction, but these would have also been historical events. As the landscape changed and grew over time, we're getting a little snapshot of social life as it changed by looking at these ritual events that are singular events, might I to emphasize. And as I said, they're all associated with construction activities. So these are important events that draw in various elements of ancient Maya life, as well as acting, as I previously said, as historical markers. And caching practices also continue today. Ethnographic examples are plenty. So Cerros, Belize. This, as I said, is known by many archaeologists, many Mayans, as a birthplace of Maya kingship. David Friedel argued in the late 80s that an institution of kingship may have arisen here through ideological means. The site is not too big, but it has a giant kind of precinct area here with maybe elite residences, and as you move out, lower class settlement that is around the margins of the site. So I wanted to look at caches differently than other people have before. Most people look at caches in terms of they were either some kind of dedication, or maybe smashed up caches look like what might be a termination. Okay, we're done with this. We're done with this architecture. A dedication cache usually. Scholars have argued may have instilled the building with some kind of energy provided for the family structure. But I'm looking at caches as they are as points of territorialization. Borrowing this concept from Deleuze and Guattari, a spatial kind of way to claim space as your own. And I'm also using Pierre Bourdieu's notion of social fields. So I'm going to look at each cache. I'm looking at 17 caches at Cerros. I'm not going to go through them all here. As I said, I've grouped them. But I'm going to look at them in terms of the social fields they produce. And I'll provide more details on what a social field is in the next slide. So a social field, according to Bourdieu, is a complex thing. And it's what I'm going to do is look at caches. It's more than, just what was in them. I'm going to say, what kinds of social relations did they produce? And how did this change and affect society? So to explain social fields, you have to look at them in a few different ways. And the three main ways I've looked at them here are in terms of the autonomy of the field. This just means, were the caches reliant on the rest of society? Were the values, the ideas, and principles that oriented these caches from within maybe a family, or did they come from the greater whole of society? I can look at these, I can answer this question by using some spatial analysis methods that I've developed. I'm not going to go too into detail here. I'll provide a little bit more detail on the next slide. And secondly, you have to look at the symbolic orders. Purdue says that when people put together arguments or statements into the world, they are arranging symbols and signs into orders that reflect their beliefs about the cosmos. I'm not going to say I'm going to get to their exact beliefs, but I'm going to look at the structuring principles that I can see in repeated patterns. And finally, Purdue says we need to look for the positionality of the agents. And this is hierarchy. Who's standing on top of the social ladder? Who's at the bottom? How are people interspersed in between? And how are they maintaining their social positions? These are all things we're going to look at. So to figure these three things out about the social fields, I use a virtual reality landscape approach. You can see here, this is a way that I looked at the autonomy of the field to see how autonomous each place of caching was. Could other people spy on a caching activity that was occurring? Was it a private thing? Was it a public thing? By moving around virtual space, I can easily define whether or not a cache could have been an autonomous kind of entity or reliant on society. I also use network analysis. Did the objects that were in the caches rely on society as a whole? Did they need to trade to get these items? In earlier caches, they were self-sufficient, very autonomous. They could produce most cache items and use them within the context of their own families. I also use Bayesian modeling and radiocarbon dates. This is a way for me to look at caching events in a very, very tight, controlled manner. I can provide 50-year date ranges in many cases. And this allowed me to kind of revise the chronology of Cerros, to look at it in a different way. Now that I have a smaller, more tightly refined chronology, I'm going to go back and question hierarchy and emergence of social order at Cerros. So I have 5 caching groups, and I'm going to go through them each real briefly. And these were spatially and temporally grouped. So with my radiocarbon dates, I said, okay, if these caches are occurring within this time period, I'm going to put them together in a group. If they're all occurring within a certain area of the site, I'm going to put them together in a group. And outliers do exist. I'm not going to go into them here. That's going to be my dissertation. So the first group of caches, when Cerros was a small village just by the lagoon. Here's a picture here. In these caches, you get small utilitarian jugs and jars. I'm not going to go through every one of them. And overall, this is a very tight span here. This is roughly 100 years that these caches are occurring. And I have about 5 caches in this group. And if we look at the social field that is produced for these caches in this familial group that were mainly in residential households. We can look at that first. We look at the autonomy of the field. We can say that since these caches occurred within the household, they probably were highly autonomous. And we see that there is a variation within the cache items. There's not a lot of social pressure telling them what they had to specifically include in their caches. We look at the symbolic orders in these caches. We see that they are loosely defined. There's no one way to build a cache. They vary types of vessels, they vary the amount of vessels, they vary sometimes little items that they put into these vessels. What they all do have, though, is vessels that are meant to contain. So the symbolic order has something to do with containing, maybe vital energy or food that was being transferred to the house, the spirits, and the architecture itself. So if we look at the positionality of the agents, we can see a hierarchy kind of starting to emerge here. Keep in mind this is when Cerros was a small village, so it would have been egalitarian in nature. And you have a family group caching items and objects that are important to them. And if we look at studies of Mayan ontology, we see that they believed that the house was kind of imbued with the spirits of the gods and ancestors. So this is really a transaction that's occurring here, from one group to another. I'm assuming that the gods, spirits, and ancestors may have been hierarchically ranked higher. So another group we have here is community caching. This is moving along. See, this is from 6 AD to 59 AD. Yes, the dates are getting really tight here. And right around this period, we see a hurricane event. The village appears to get knocked over. And they built a giant plaza to cover it up, and that's when they start building monumental architecture. So if we look at this, the overall autonomy of the field changes here. All the caches that occur in this group, I rank as having low autonomy, because they're in big open areas where everybody could come, they could participate, they could see. Social values would have had to have been exchanged, but also monitored. We look at symbolic orders, we see that there is a move to centrality, whereas the previous caches, it didn't matter where you put it. You put it in the corner of your house, you put it in the back, sometimes they're in the front. In all the caches in this group, they are all placed in a central area. And we even see the emergence of a triangular arrangement of objects in caches. And also, once again, there are always containers meant to hold food and maybe even drinks. So if we look at the agents that are involved here, that's not clicking, we really don't see that much differentiation. There wouldn't have been any places that really segregated people separate from each other. So I rank it as there's a community, and there's the gods, ancestors, and spirits. We start to see things change dramatically moving into the next period. So structure 5. This is a piece of architecture that J. Friedel wrote so much about. There's a bunch of caches in it. Moving through this quick. We look at this, we see that there is a great change in the social field. So this social field I draw a little bit differently because it had an upper area that could only be accessed through one doorway, and it is restricting view from overall people that would have participated, and also creating just a separate kind of social field. Architecture was mainly open, but there was a large building on top, as you saw in the previous slide. So I rank it as having a medium autonomy and a low autonomy. So this area is a low autonomy, because anybody can come in and participate, whereas this one, obviously, was limited even in terms of who can even fit in there. We looked at the symbolic orders. You see all of a sudden that a rigidification is occurring. All the caches in this group, all are lip-to-lip containers. 2 pots put together, all of them. They're all in central locations, and they start to include rare items like jade and a lot of shells. And I can assume probably food would fit in there as well. We also get things like citationality. We see direct links to previous caches, and we also see stairways getting put in there, or caches getting put into stairways. There's something about putting the cache into a place that you're going to walk on top. Okay. So you say, okay, so we start to see social stratification here just by looking at the field. This open area, there would have been a group here, and then the deities and ancestors. I'm going to skip ahead since we're running out of time. If we look at one of the latest large architectural constructions, we see that there's a stratification even more. The architecture had 3 different levels, and the groups would have been limited to their access, but also how they could participate, and we could see what was going on and on. And there's more rigid symbolic orders that appear. as well. So we start to see society kind of stratify and emerge by looking at these social fields, just from caches. And if we compare all of them, as I said, I have 5 groups, we can see the emergence of social stratification over time. And this is all occurring roughly within 150-year period. So, the overall time span is important because it shows that, that society became stratified very, very quickly. Caching also had a lot of variability. And as society became more and more stratified, that variability dropped. And now I did test caches from all over the site, but at least in these cases, the variability completely drops. We see that there is a big change that occurs right in this period. It's almost like society goes from egalitarian, maybe there's a chief, to the dynamic change or shift in social stratification here. And also we start to see around this time period what I would argue is a regional influence. The items that they're including in caches are items that are included in caches all over the minor lobes, like the leptolink caches. And we also see that around this time period, all the caches start citing the past. They are linking past actions, and my results indicate that this has to do with a very specific production of local history. So for the future, I got to refine this field, the social field, find more avenues of exploration besides those 3. I'd like to compare social fields, not just at my site, but at various sites. And I would like to also figure out what dominant regional fields actually influence Cerros and may have influenced other sites. Thanks.